Greetings, everybody. Troy Lamel Stovall here, CEO of TEDCO, Maryland's Entrepreneurial and Innovation Hub. Here today, I'm going to introduce Jeff here in a minute, but I'm sitting here, we're taping this right after Labor Day. We're right into the middle of football season. But more importantly, this week, if for those of you who may not know, is National HBCU Week, National Historically Black College University Week. It actually ends today. So I'm wearing my Jackson State jersey. For those who know, I used to work at Jackson State. Very proud of all the HBCUs, and our 4 HBCUs here in Maryland. We're doing a lot of great stuff with them. But I had to represent, the HBCUs. Jeff's wearing his Catholic University, but that's all right. We're celebrating HBCUs. I am here with Jeff Cherry, who leads a great organization called Conscious Venture Labs, which we'll learn a whole lot more about. But Jeff, first of all, thanks for joining me today and hanging out with me today.
Troy, my man, it's good to see you. I was going to Howard across the reservoir from Catholic, but I wasn't smart enough. They wouldn't let me in. So.
I'm sure our HU folks would love hearing that part. So, Jeff, you have had just an amazing career, but I want to focus on your athletic side, if I may, for a minute. Yeah. So, as I understand it, you're a recovering football player. And you did some Taekwondo. So tell folks about your football career.
Well, I hope I'm going to grab something because I hope my friend of mine, my friend Ralph Fusillo, who I went to high school, I hope he watches this. I'm going to send it to him. That's my plaque.
Oh, big time.
Patchogue Medford High School Hall of Fame. And don't worry, I'm not really reliving these glory days, folks. I only do that because Troy asked me to. Look, I've loved football all my life. I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to play football. I went down to the University of Miami and I saw cheerleaders that were bigger than I was. So I figured I wasn't going to make it at Miami. So I came back and was coming through Baltimore, where my mom's family is from Baltimore. Mm-hmm. So we were going to through Baltimore, and the folks from Catholic U had come to my high school to talk to us. And my dad and my mom and I just drove down to DC, went to Catholic. They had a good architecture program, small time, college football. But I got to play all 4 years I was there, and I wouldn't have changed it. I wouldn't have changed it for
what position did you play?
I played defensive back. I was a cornerback. Played with some great guys that I'm still dear friends with today, 30 some odd years hence. So it was just it was an amazing experience. Just anytime you're a part of a team and you're part of a team of people you care about. So it was an amazing experience. I wouldn't have changed it for the world.
So how many interceptions you get, man? How many career interceptions you got?
I was a goose egg in college because I injured myself. I'd never been injured. I had never been injured playing football, and my freshman year I partially severed my Achilles tendon, and then the next year I tore my rotator cuff.
Oh my goodness.
So while I played a lot, I usually was playing the sort of fifth back, so the nickel back, so more tackles and a few fumble recoveries than I had interceptions.
I understand. All right, but you got that Hall of Fame because you went to school in New York, right? You're from New York.
I did. I went to high school in New York. Yeah.
Gotcha. So then from there you took up Taekwondo.
Yeah, it's something I was always really interested in. I always wanted to be interested in the martial arts. So I started late. I started taking martial arts when I was in my 20s, but I studied for a long time. So I did 12 years of Taekwondo, first a black belt, and then I started Krav Maga, which is the martial arts of the Israeli Defense Forces, which I did for a long time, which was really interesting too. I'm probably too old to do either of them now, but I can still get around the gym if I have to.
So how does that help you, Jeff, in what you do? We're going to learn more about, but how does that help you from a mental focus, from a stamina? How does that help you do what you do?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, it is if you study with the right people, and I think that I have over the years. I studied with a woman out of DC by the name of Carol Middleton, who was like the martial arts woman of the year for like 5 years running. She actually started a women's only self-defense school, and I was the class of the first men that she accepted into the program. So we had a whole different sort of ethos, right?
Yeah.
So the one thing that I learned in Taekwondo, for sure, in the martial arts, is that it wasn't about fighting, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was about discipline. It was about learning to understand, right? I mean, it was about learning to control your body. So I think that I became, as I progressed from a beginner up to a black belt, the one thing I noticed, I became much more calm. I was a football player and, knucklehead when you were younger, right? But as I got older and as I studied martial arts more, I became much more centered, much more calm, it's a whole way of thinking of it, particularly when you're doing Eastern martial, Taekwondo from Korea or karate from Japan, those sorts of things. I think it's a philosophy about how to live life, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of it. And then even in Krav Maga, I think it's a level of confidence that because even in Krav Maga, and I went to I studied with some really great guys that, come here from Israel, that it's about learning how to protect yourself. I mean, the whole thing was, I studied a place called the Fighters Garage in Alexandria.
Okay.
So a regressive name, but they were like, look, the last thing we want to do is get into a fight, right? The first, at all costs, you want to stay out of a fight if you can. You want to get away from the situation. You don't want to be in dangerous situations. That's the last thing you want to do. However, if you're going to be in a dangerous situation, we're going to show you how to protect yourself, right? So I just think that whole mindset of this ain't about fighting. You want to learn how to protect yourself. You want to learn how to use the things around you. You want to learn all this sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, you really want to be aware of your surroundings. You want to be calm in dangerous situations. You want to be calm and, when everything else, that the old saying, when everything else is going crazy around you, your ability to stay centered and stay calm. And the more that the easier it is for you to do that. So that's sort of what I take away.
And do you use that discipline and that calmness in business as you do negotiations and work with the entrepreneurs and banks and the like?
No question, Troy. I mean, look, when you're especially in the Krav space, when you're sparring Krav Maga and you got punched in the face 10 times yesterday, negotiation with a banker is nothing. I just had a guy that was on, that was in the Israeli Defense Forces, ripped my shoulder out of the socket yesterday. What are you going to do to me?
Do me? Not alone, really. I'll rip your shoulder out.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a common. I mean, like there is, and sometimes you talk to some of those guys, particularly in the Krav Maga, and they've been in some rough situations, right? We train with a lot of police officers, a lot of military guys, and they're like, that we do are important, but there's a perspective that you get from it, I think.
No question. Well, you've given us a little bit of your journey already, because one of the things I always like, particularly someone like you, Jeff, who is very accomplished and doing some great stuff for the state of Maryland, for Baltimore, but your journey is important, right? And I'd like for you to spend just a few minutes, not, as we discussed, not so much a resume recite, but more of how you came to be and how you overcame some things, and either how sports or somebody in your life or something in your life kind of helped you get you on the path to be down this path of making the impact type of investor that you are.
Yeah. We come from I have three sisters, and we come from a really, really close family, very middle class, sort of New York. But I think that the beginning of that probably had a lot to do with my grandfather. And some people who listen to this may know this. When I first started the company that is now evolved into Conscious Venture Partners, we saw a company called Marion Porter LLC. And Marion Porter was my grandfather's name, MP. And a lot of the things that we do, like our investment management firm, if you have a venture capital fund, you have a general partner, you also have a separate investment manager. The investment manager is Cleo Porter, and that was my grandmother and my grandfather's name. So a lot of that journey, if you will, Troy, had to do with my family, particularly my grandfather. My dad was a hard worker. We just saw hard work around us all the time. My grandfather was a construction guy, was in the labor's union in New York. My mom worked in a probation officer. So we just saw hard work around us all the time. But I remember the day I graduated from high school, and we were living on Long Island by then, and everyone in my class, they were all going to the beach the next day, right? We're out of school, going to the beach. And we were having a graduation party at my house, and my dad said, "No beach for you tomorrow. It's you got to go to work tomorrow." My first job, I was a bike messenger for Salomon Brothers. People ask me about the investment business, and I said, "Yeah, I worked on Wall Street once. I was a bike messenger." That was my first job, and I had to get up and to take the bike on the Long Island subway and go into the city and all that nonsense. And I was pissed. I didn't want to go to work. I wanted to go to the beach the next day.
Exactly.
And I was stalking around the house or something. My grandfather came over to me and he said, "What's the matter?" And I'm like, "Well, everyone's going to the beach and I want to go." He's like, "Boy," he goes, "in this family, you go to work." He's like, "You don't want to grow up and be like me." And I was stunned because I didn't want anything else but to grow up and be like him. But he had, he worked. He started working when he was, I think he left home to go work on a farm, when he was like 12 years old or some nonsense like that, and had run it was a blast foreman building, New York City subway tunnels and tunnels at the Pentagon. So he had a hard job and a hard life, and he was just like, you want to transcend, you got to work hard.
I like that.
So I think it was about the way that my family is, from all the way down from my grandparents, my great grandparents who I knew, my great grandmother who grew up here in Baltimore. It was just a hardworking group of people, lots of women in our family that didn't take no mess. So, what I'm saying?
Yep. Old school black mamas. We'll get a switch. People are about to get a switch. Get a switch.
Go outside. I remember being in Fairfield here in Cherry Hill. My great grandmother said, "Go outside and get me a switch."
Yep.
I'm like, that's the craziest. I'm going to go outside and get you a switch and whoop my ass.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and don't come back with some little branch.
No. I tell you, go get me a switch. I mean, get me a switch. So yeah, there's a lot of that going on in our family, but you just learned, we just learned that that's what was important in life, I think.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a really strong village around you, but and I talk about this with my friends, and I grew up in Texas and Houston, Texas, and we all had that strong, but we got to be successful. Like I got to move away, and I don't have that strong family unit around us. My wife is the same way. My wife, she has her dad, my father-in-law, is one of 22. And so she grew up with a lot. I know my mother-in-law is one of 9. So yeah. And so, but she grew up around it. But now we live here in the DC, and we don't have that same family connectivity. Yes, we have a lot of good friends, but we don't have a lot of what you described. When our kids got to know their grandparents and their great grandparents and the like. I just think our success has taken away something that I had, and that my wife had.
Interesting. I mean, I think even when I was growing up, I mean, it's got to be worse now, but I knew 3 of my great grandparents.
Yeah.
Right. And that is definitely not the norm. Right. So we had a big family. Some people had kids young, but we had a lot of cousins and nephews and everyone around. And, we would come to Baltimore and stay in this it was probably a 2-bedroom, shotgun shack in Fairfield and Cherry Hill. And I thought it was a mansion, and there was probably 20 of us in there. Yeah,
And you should learn how to share one. It's funny how you can share one bathroom. Now I got what 4 or 5 bathrooms in this house, and we can't figure out how to make 4 or 5 bathrooms work. I don't get
exactly.
it. So,
Exactly.
but you've already mentioned it. I love the name of what you do, Conscious Ventures. I think that's exactly. I think the name says it all. But why don't you tell our listeners about Conscious Ventures?
Yeah. So a little bit of the background, as you know, I'm an architect with Catholic U, studied architecture, and for the course of 20 years business, an architecture business, that we morphed into more of a management consulting company. And over the course of that, running that business, we to see the emergence of what we now call stakeholder capitalism, right? That the companies that we were working with that were the most successful were not the ones that were focused myopically on shareholders, but they were the ones that were focused on creating value for all of their stakeholders. I got really enamored with that. The honor of being a consultant on a book called Firms of Endearment with a guy named Raj Sisodia, who was a marketing professor at Bentley College. He's now at Babson at the Entrepreneurship School. And then he subsequently wrote Conscious Capitalism with John Mackey from Whole Foods. That sort of started me on this path of how to think about business and how to think about capitalism and the practice of capitalism. We were exposed through Raj and a bunch of other people, a guy named Ed Freeman, who's a professor down at University of Virginia, with this idea that there was a new narrative about the practice of business going on in the world, that it wasn't just about a bunch of greedy little bastards trying to do each other in, that it was actually the best businesses were looking at a more holistic way of how to create value for society. So that was sort of what set me on this path. We ended up selling that consulting company after working on Conscious Capitalism with Raj. My partner, a guy named Rick Frazier, another Catholic U guy, and I started thinking about how could we support businesses that were thinking that way, that were thinking about more holistically about how do we support our employees, suppliers, community, customers, environment, in addition to shareholders. So we just sort of said we want to go into the belly of the beast. So we started a hedge fund, and the hedge fund was about how do we invest in companies that were thinking that with that more long-term holistic mindset. That was a great exercise. We did that for 6 or 7 years. We raised a lot of money, even in the middle of the financial crisis. And then we had been having this discussion internally for a long time about how do we make this idea of conscious ventures the norm and not the exception, right? And we determined that you couldn't do it through the hedge fund, that you had to do it in a different way. It was a grassroots movement, and that long story short, that you had to build startups that were thinking that way. So I decided I wanted to do that. I left the fund in 2012, and I started writing the business plan for the Conscious Venture Lab. And I called someone who's also been on the show, I think, with you. I called Julie Lenzer. Julie and I have been friends for a long time. And I said, hey, I'm going to do this thing. I know you know about entrepreneurship. And I said, I want you to come work for me. And she was like, I know you better than that. I'm not doing that. But she said, I love my job and I'm working for this guy. His name is Ken Ullman. He's the county executive in Howard County. And I said, where's Howard County? And she said, well, we'll work on that in a bit, but I want you to talk to Ken. And Ken just got naturally what we were doing. He just said he was thinking differently about the practice of economic development. Like, I'm not going to steal Lockheed Martin from you guys, and you guys are going to try to steal, McCormick from us and yada, yada, yada. But can we build our own unicorns from the ground up? And then, so Ken and I got on the phone and started talking about this notion that the winning businesses of the future were going to be the businesses that thought with a conscious mindset. They're in a business that thought with a stakeholder mindset. So we negotiated, and he decided to give us some money to launch the Conscious Venture Lab if we would move the thing to Columbia, Maryland, and match whatever he was able to raise for us with investment capital. And that's how we get started. And then sort of the end of the story, the Baltimore part is that, did it in Howard County for a few years. We know the story. Ken ran for lieutenant governor. That didn't work out and was off to something else. And I was making the commute from DC to Howard County. And I decided, I got tired of that commute, moved into Baltimore City in January 2015. And then in April of 2015, Freddie Gray gets killed in the back of a police van. And I was watching what was going on, and I'd become friends with Stephanie Rawlings Blake. And I said to her, I said, these riots aren't about Freddie Gray. They're about underinvesting in minority communities for the last 100 years. Not you personally, but us as a society. And we got to do something about that. So sort of a very similar conversation. What should we do? How can we do it? We decided to move from Howard County into West Baltimore, and that we started here. So that whole thing is about our evolution, right? First, about understanding that there was a new narrative about business that being developed, and the way that we practice capitalism could be a force for good in society, and then to think about who we wanted to support in that way. And that these, the thing that we saw in Baltimore is that we had a less resilient city because we weren't including everyone in the promise of the city. And how could we include everyone in the promise? So those sort of things came together to me, and that's how we sort of came up with this idea to build an accelerator and a venture capital fund to support entrepreneurs who are breaking down barriers to access, who want to use business as a force for good in society, and to support entrepreneurs that other people are ignoring. So, in communities, and then people who look like you and me that are find it difficult to raise money. So.
Man, that's first of all, thank you for that, and thank you for what you're doing. In a lot of ways we go, and I know we won't get to all of it. We have to have you back, but I want to. I'm gonna say something. See if you agree or disagree. That I think there's an interesting kind of continuum that happens. Well, let me back up. That just like a lot of words in the English language, capitalism has been narrowly defined as this only about return to shareholder. And I like the word you use, that there are stakeholders, and capitalism in and of itself isn't a bad thing. It's how it gets used that becomes, if you will, the bad thing, right?
Yeah.
And so what I point is that when back in the 80s, if you talked about being environmentally conscious, you were called a tree hugger, right? No one wanted to.
Yeah.
But now all of a sudden, now you have a whole asset allocation around ESG. You have a whole thing around sustainability, and people now get how they can actually make money and save the planet at the same time.
Yeah.
And so I say that to say, do you see a potential evolution for a market segment around? And again, you have social responsible investing, but this notion of conscious capital asset moving its way to being a fundamental part of an asset allocation for investors as we move forward.
I 100% do. And look, when we saw the hedge fund, everyone said, "Oh, ESG," and we said, "No, it's not ESG. That is risk mitigation. We're talking about something much bigger than that." Right? This idea that we run businesses not just for shareholders, but we run businesses to create value for society first. And if you do a great job at that, right, you'll make money. Peter Drucker said, businesses don't make money.
Nope.
They make shoes, or they make glasses, or they make cell phones, right? And if they create a value for enough people, they'll make a profit, right? The problem we have is that we've been trained to think about business the other way around, that the purpose of business is to create value for shareholders. Yep. We know that that's not true. The purpose of business is to create value for customers, for society, for employees. If you do a good job of it, then shareholders will be rewarded, right? So we always talk about.
But greed has got, the problem is what you described as greed. That we've substituted greed for cap. That's really what happened.
A good friend of mine, a guy named Joe Carlini, who's an investor in my fund, went to Catholic with me, said to me once, Jeff, capitalism isn't the problem. Capitalists are the problem.
There you go.
It's just like you said, they've taken a great idea and implemented it in a way that is unfair, that creates, that has unintended consequences, and the greed has seeped in, that makes people not care about those things, right? And we're saying that, in fact, if you take off the shareholder blinders and you start worrying about, how do I get my employees to give a damn about this place like I do? How do I get my suppliers to feel like partners and not like servants? And how do I get communities to welcome me instead of putting barriers to access because they believe that I have their interests at heart? And how do I get customers to want to be in a relationship with me and not just transaction? Companies that think with that mindset, if you do those things, if you take care of those four stakeholders, you'll make money, right? So, we always say, if all you care about is money, you should do what we say anyway, because you'll make more of it, right? But it matters how you make the money, right?
Hey, bro, like I said, we go a bunch of different places. But won't you give our listeners and viewers an example of the type of company that you've invested in that's played out and shown this type of example?
Yeah. So, I mean, it gets to the point where we've got a few of them, but we use this one because it's locally, certainly is one that a lot of people know, which is Hungry Harvest. We were the first investor in Hungry Harvest. They were doing about $40,000 in revenue when we wrote them our first check, and bought 5% of the company. And now I think this year they're running their run rate. They're probably running at a rate of about 30 million. They'll probably end the year, I don't know, somewhere around 25 or something like that. Of the numbers off the top of my head, but a significant increase in 6 or 7 years from 40,000 to 30-40 million dollars in revenue. And the idea, if you talk to Evan Lutz, he's like, look, 6 billion pounds of food goes to waste every year. And there are 50 million people in the United States that have that are food insecure. Means they don't know where their next meal is coming from. Can I take one problem to solve the other? Right. And that's how Hungry Harvest was born. Right. He goes to local farmers and distributors, food that's going to get thrown away because it's aesthetically unpleasing, right? Or because of supply chain inefficiencies. He buys it from them. He doesn't ask them to donate it. He buys it from them. But since they were going to give it away or throw it away, whatever he pays for it is good. So his margins are high because he buys it for pennies on the dollar, much cheaper than you can get it. Then he sells it for much cheaper you can get it in the grocery store. And he uses what he's good at to help solve that problem of food insecurity, right? He's good at logistics. He's good at marketing, right? He uses those to help solve that problem. What he didn't do is start that business saying, hey, I'm going to sell food and make a lot of money. But he's selling food and making a lot of money because of that mission, right? When you bring those two things, profit and purpose, together, right? That's what's propelling that business. So that's probably one of the most well-known. There's another business that we're really high on, R3 Score Technologies. I don't know if you know them, Lauren Leonard and Teresa Hodge. Yeah. Just thinking about the fact that 70 million Americans will have a record by 2030. And lots of those were trying to come back into society and reintegrate. And by us not understanding how to deal with previously incarcerated individuals, we're leaving value, talent, money all on the table, right? So they've created a product that helps bankers and hiring managers understand the real risk of working with previously incarcerated returning citizens, which is much lower than we give it credit for, right? I made a mistake, paid my dues, want to come back, want to contribute to society. Right now, we don't have a way to think about that. So they're developing a way to think about that. And we think that's a huge business, right?
A part of what I hear you saying, Jeff, to put this in for those who may be listening that have a more of a, to your point, a capitalistic mindset, is you've helping people to see risk in a different way. Whether that risk was in the food supply chain or in a certain demographic of society, using the two examples that you just gave, and I'm sure you could. But what I hear you saying, if I want to go back to my economist class, is, because part of investing is trying to mitigate a risk or trying to understand the risk and how do I shield myself or invest my way through the risk, right? If I'm using
Yeah.
traditional.
Or
And
how,
so what I hear you saying is no, there's a different way to think about the risk lens and how I invest into it intentionally.
exactly, right? I mean, risk is, different people think about risk in different ways, right? We think about what's the risk of a society where 50 million people are continuously food insecure, right? That's a huge risk. And there's waste happening. And we always know that there's opportunity in waste, right? So it's just a different way, a different lens through which we view the nature of business and the nature of risk. So I think that that's right. Yeah.
You haven't used these words, you've alluded to them, but you haven't used, the magic words that are being used since in this last year of COVID has been diversity, equity, and inclusion. I joke with my friends. I said, I think I went down the wrong path because look, every day I wake up, somebody's getting hired to be somebody's DEI, vice president or managing director somewhere. But that's become the buzzword for a lot of different things, right?
Yeah.
Talk to us, and I know it's a big topic, we won't cover it all, but as you think about what you do at Conscious, how this notion of diversity, equity, and inclusion plays out.
Yeah. I think that there's so many different tentacles to that.
I know.
I'm not sure where to go. I mean, there's one we think about from diversity from investing in diverse founders, right? Well, one, it's the right thing to do because everyone, Steve Case always says that talent and intelligence is equally distributed across society. Opportunity is not.
It's not. Yep.
Right. So we should do that. I mean, it's the right thing to do. Oh, and by the way, if we're investing in diverse entrepreneurs, we're finding ideas that other people aren't finding, which is great for my investors, for me and my investors, right? If I find an idea that someone else didn't think of, that's I have asymmetric information, right?
Yep.
Which is going to create more value in the long run. So there's that. There's the diversity of thought, right? I mean, we started at our hedge fund, started what we call a diversity a diversity portfolio, which had a lot to do with the makeup of the boards, women and minorities on boards. Those boards with more women, particularly, and more women and minorities on boards, the companies that have that makeup, they tend to outperform, right?
Yep.
Nobody really wants to believe that, but it's true. We've done the work. We know it's true, and that's because of lots of things, not the least of which is diversity of thought, right? Diversity of perspective. There's this idea of there are big problems that are happening in underrepresented diverse communities that aren't just local problems. So if you solve that problem in one place, you can solve it in hundreds of other places, right? Which drives value. So everywhere you look, if you think about diversity, if you think about equity, if you think about inclusion through, and we think about it through, I'm a business person, right? Yeah. And I think it through a lens of creating new businesses and creating value for society. Every time we do that, we find new ways to create value for shareholders too. So, we always say that our impact, which is investing in diverse communities, always drives returns.
I love it.
Right?
I love it. No, I say, and some of the listeners may have heard me say this before, that there's, and I tell this to among white venture capitalist friends, there's this huge multi-billion-dollar business that's highly fragmented, chemical-based, product marketing-based, multi-channel based, very loyal customer base. You know what it's called? Black women's hair care.
Yeah.
I got Tammy on the line, probably laughing right now.
Yeah, and so I knew you're going there.
But I say all the time, the economics there, and the day that some Black woman gets at a venture fund and figures it out, I said she's gonna lead the rest of y'all, and she's, to your point, she's gonna make some money and have an impact.
Our boy Matt McKeever Conwell, he's got an investment in that space. He's gonna make some money on it. He's going to, right?
Yep, and we just put some money in a potential opportunity and with him as well. So look, man, let's close out. I appreciate your time. I told you I was gonna have some fun with you. So a couple of things. So I'm gonna give you the one that I told you I was gonna ask you because you said you're gonna think about it. but I'm gonna give you one I didn't tell you.
Okay, all right.
So I told him I was gonna ask him, he had to choose between Scooby-Doo and Lassie.
Yeah, I'm gonna, I knew you were gonna ask me that too. And I thought about it. I'm still not sure if I know the right answer, but I'm gonna say Scooby-Doo, because Scooby-Doo is more, I mean, Lassie was sort of like that was more of the 50s. I was born in the 60s, and then I was watching Scooby-Doo. I remember watching Scooby-Doo when I was in college still. So I'm gonna say Scooby-Doo, the whole band. I'm probably more of a Scooby guy.
And some of your younger listeners, go to YouTube and do search on Lassie so you can figure out what we're talking about. Okay.
Exactly.
Here's one. And now, look, I'm a huge comic book fan. I've done the whole Marvel cinematic and DC. So here's the question for you. What superpower would you choose? But you can't choose flight or super strength. What's your superpower you want to have?
Oh, definitely want to read people's minds.
Oh, look at you.
Yeah, no question about it. I want to have.
You just want to read their minds. You don't want to control. You don't want.
No, I don't want to control. I want asymmetric information.
As an investor, that would be.
Yeah, no, a lot of people know.
Oh, that's
it's now my sisters. If my sisters listen to this, they will say, the superpower. Did you watch Game of Thrones?
Oh yeah.
My sisters say he has a superpower. He's like Tyrion. He drinks and he knows things.
Well, Matt, you and I got to get together and do that.
Yeah. I owe you a cocktail. I know that.
Yes, absolutely. I tell people my superpower is speed, super speed.
Speed. Okay.
Because with that, because if you really understand super speed, man, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do. So you can change time. You can go through walls. You can do some real. But reading minds not a bad. Controlling minds is a whole nother level.
I don't want to control people's minds. I mean, look, if I know if I know what they're thinking, then I could use my knowledge to sort of get them around to my way of thinking. But
I got you. Jeff, brother, I appreciate you. Appreciate what you're doing. We will continue to do stuff together. I know. Obviously, we already have some deal flow between our two entities, and we'll continue to do so. But we'll get together. Thank you for being with us today on TEDCO Talks, man. I really appreciate you.
T, always a pleasure to spend time with you, and let's get together and do it in person soon.
Absolutely. To our listeners, again, thank you all. We appreciate your continued comments, your continued support of TEDCO Talks. Again, this is Troy Lamel Stovall signing off. See you next time.